Greetings, listeners, and welcome to this episode of Out of the Darkness. I am your host, Angela, and as always, I thank you for joining me. On this episode, we're going to have a look at the subject of haunted dolls. But before we begin, I'd like to give a huge shout out to all of our supporters. We appreciate every single like and share and follow, and without your support, our work wouldn't be possible. In this episode, I'm going to share with you some recent stories I have found online about haunted dolls. And I'm also going to share with you a personal story about our very own haunted Violet the fairy doll. So without further ado, sit back, relax, and let's hear some creepy tales. In the past week, there's been a story going around online about a doll by the name of Annie. She was recently participating in a paranormal investigation, and the people who own her claim she began to cry real tears. Now, even though this story has been labelled and it's coming up as a possessed doll or a haunted doll, there is a question on whether it really is a haunted doll. So for anyone who hasn't heard the story that's been going around, I'll quickly tell the story of Annie. So Annie belongs to a paranormal investigator by the name of Matt Tillett. Now, Matt recently took her on an investigation to what is called the Hideout Bar in northern Wales. During this investigation, for some reason, Annie began to cry real tears. Now, Matt and his team say that the tears were so much that it stained her face. So Annie is actually a paranormal investigation tool. So she is what we refer to as a trigger object. Annie is also fitted with lights and audio recording equipment. So just as a side note, Matt Tillett and his team do point out that it's not any kind of condensation or anything, because she has a big hole in the top of her head, etc., where the equipment is actually fitted. Now, they also pointed out that while this crying was taking place, the equipment fitted to Annie, such as the lights, EMF detection and things like that, were actually going off. During their investigation at this particular location, they did capture evidence of some spirits in that bar. They had contact with some children, so there's the possibility that it was perhaps the children trying to play with the doll. They also picked up what sounded like a woman screaming and made contact with a man that used to live on a former property that was on that location. So there were some other spirit activity detected at the location that could have been responsible for what was going on with Annie. Now, Matt further goes on to explain that because Annie is a trigger object or a piece of equipment that they use, they store her, since they have owned her, so that's been about for the past year, in a box with their other equipment. So the question has been raised, because they've only owned her for the past 12 months, and they're storing her in a box, is the crying a spirit attached to Annie that is unhappy because it's trapped in a box? And that is a notion put forward by a demonologist who has had a look at Annie for Matt and his team. So it's certainly an interesting one, and certainly one that I'm going to keep an eye on and see if there's any updates about Annie. As time goes on, it might become clearer for Matt and his team whether that was something unique to that location or if it's actually something attached to Annie. Now, the interesting thing about this story, and why I've decided to include it in this podcast, is it highlights a bit of a difference between a traditional haunted doll and a piece of detection equipment, or what we call a trigger object. So in recent times, there's been an explosion of the availability of paranormal detection equipment. And one of the things that has been really successful and popular is the doll. And I think there's one called the Boo Bear or something like that, and it's like a cute fuzzy bear, but it's fitted with your EMF detector, or basically similar to a REM pod. Some of them even have like audio recording devices inside of them, but basically they're designed to take with you to an investigation, and they might trigger activity. So Matt and his team actually say that Annie is very successful at triggering paranormal activity. If there's a spirit nearby, they're very attracted to her. I also know people who have the doll or bear version, and they say they're very successful. I don't actually have a trigger object doll. I do have many other trigger objects that I use, and we'll talk about trigger object banks in another episode. Don't actually have a trigger doll as such. What I do have, however, is a fairy doll that any child who is left alone with this doll tells me it's haunted. Well, they don't tell me the doll is haunted, but they're adamant that the doll moves, turns its head, looks at them, changes position, and overall follows them around. So I'm now going to tell you the story of Violet, the fairy doll that currently resides in my closet. If you check out the YouTube video that will go along with this podcast, I do have some videos and EVP sessions with Violet that I'll post on our YouTube channel for you to see. So I don't have a trigger doll as such, but what I do have is a doll by the name of Violet. Now, Violet is a fairy doll that was given to my daughter when she was a child, and she's designed to hang from the ceiling. And she's just a really pretty porcelain doll fairy. She doesn't look creepy or anything, and unlike Annie, she's not any kind of paranormal device. She's just a child's ornament for their room. Now, ever since we hung this doll in my daughter's room, my daughter reported that this doll would turn around to look at her while she was sleeping at night. And she would ask me to turn it around before she went to sleep so that it was facing the wall. And then many nights she would say that when she would wake up in the middle of the night, it would be facing her. I'd also experienced this where I would have the doll facing the wall, and when I walked past the doorway, she would be facing the doorway. While Violet gives off a slightly creepy feel, it's never been scary. It's more like a fae or fairy energy. Somebody just watching. I always thought it was dependent on her being hung up, but recently my younger daughter decided to clean out her room, and she had been storing Violet in her closet. As after a couple of moves while we built a new home, Violet had ended up in a box. When we moved into the new home, my eldest daughter didn't want her hung up, but didn't want to get rid of her. She wants to keep her, but she just doesn't want her hung up. So we put her in the closet in a box, and we were aware of keeping an eye out for any activity that may come from having put Violet in a box, but nothing seemed to happen and everything was fine. That was a few years ago now, but recently my younger daughter decided to clean out her closet, and Violet ended up sitting in the living room of their father's house. And my son came across her, and he too became adamant that Violet was moving position or turning to look at him, and he wanted me to come and take it. So when I spoke to their dad, he also agreed that the doll creeped him out, but he didn't really know what to do about it and figured it was fine as long as it was just in a box in a cupboard somewhere. In the end, they ended up bringing me the doll. So I took the doll, and since then I've done some EVPs with her, during which time she asked me where she was. She had moved locations, and she asked to be hung up. So I thought that very interesting, and I'll put these clips up on our YouTube channel and social media so that you can see Violet for yourself. Violet doesn't look creepy at all. She's actually quite a pretty doll. Now, as I said, apart from moving position or turning on her swing or giving you the impression that she's watching you while you're in the room, she's not actually ever done anything to anybody. So again, this I feel is not a harmful energy. I feel like it's a fairy come to watch over my daughter or the space or something like that, but it isn't malevolent. Now, a bit like Annie, I could take Violet on a paranormal investigation. Just because she wasn't built or fitted to be a trigger object doll. So there is validity in using an object such as Violet, who does have paranormal phenomena occur around her, or people have experienced paranormal phenomena when around them. Because I believe children, when it's all children who've been or spent time in a room, because, you know, it's friends of my daughter and stuff, all agree that this doll is creepy and seems to be watching you. It doesn't matter how you position it, it will then be watching you. So it's a fairly consistent story from all children. So as previously mentioned, there are a few EVP session and spirit box sessions with Violet that we will upload so that you can see for yourself. While researching stories for this episode, I actually came across another Violet doll that appears to be haunted, although with a much more malevolent spirit than our own Violet doll. So here is another haunted Violet doll. I got this doll at a yard sale. It caught my eye as I was driving past. It was on a chair with a piece of paper taped to its chest that said, "Haunted, take it, it's free." I found it funny and asked the owner why she thought it was haunted. She told me she'd bought it at a thrift store for her daughter as she'd begged her for it. As they were driving home, her daughter gave it the name Violet. The next day, she heard another little girl's voice arguing with her daughter in the living room. She went to check and saw her daughter sitting on the couch watching TV with Violet beside her. She asked her who she was talking to, and she said Violet. A week later, while her daughter was at a friend's house, she began hearing a girl's voice coming from her daughter's room. She goes to check and sees Violet sitting in the middle of the room. She grabbed Violet and put her on the bed and walked out. As she began walking towards the kitchen, she tells me she saw the magnetic letters on the refrigerator spell out "Hi." Then a music box in her living room started to play, and the door to her daughter's bedroom slammed shut. She grabbed her keys and left the house in a hurry. She waited outside until her husband came home. When they opened the door, they saw Violet sitting in the living room, on the coffee table in front of one of her daughter's colouring books. As her husband takes one step inside, the pages of the book started to flip frantically by itself until it flew across the room. After that, her husband grabbed Violet and threw her in the shed, where it stayed until the morning of their yard sale. She looked me in the eyes and said, "Take it. We don't want it in our lives anymore." I was sold. I was skeptical, but I loved the story, plus it was free. I took it home and placed it right beside my bed on the nightstand. Almost a month went by without experiencing anything, until one night I felt someone sit on the foot of my bed. I turned the light on but didn't see anything. I live alone with no pets, so I was startled. A couple of days later, I was in the kitchen making a sandwich, when I heard a disembodied girl's voice whisper, "Hey," right over my shoulder. I ran towards the corner of the living room, grabbing my chest because it felt like my heart was going to explode. Later that night, as I was laying on my couch, I heard a giggling coming from my bedroom. I got up to walk inside and I saw Violet sitting on my bed. I was creeped out. I always keep her on the nightstand, and there she was on my bed. At this point, I started to believe the woman's story, so I bought an EMF detector. I had seen them used on ghost shows, so I thought I'd give it a try. I put it near Violet and got constant high readings. I was intrigued, so I bought a spirit box in an attempt to try to communicate with her. After 2 weeks of nothing from the spirit box, I finally got a high, followed by "get the thing." I was excited, so I went back to the previous owner. I told her about my experiences and investigation on Violet. I asked if there was anything that the doll might have been attached to. She said that maybe it was the music box that went off. I asked her if she still had it, and she gave it to me. After about a week of off and on spirit box sessions, I got a girl's laugh, followed by something that sent a chill down my spine. A man's voice said, "Devil." Immediately I thought of the theory that demons disguise themselves as little girls in order to get you into a vulnerable state. I didn't want to take that chance, so I grabbed the doll and threw it outside into my backyard. It landed face first. The next morning I decided to take that doll and put it in a storage unit. I open the back door and see it sitting down a few feet closer to where it landed, staring right back at me. I grabbed it and put it in storage. It's been about 2 weeks and the activity has stopped, but I haven't been able to stop thinking about Violet. I have this urge to open the storage room, close the door behind me and do another spirit box session. My gut tells me not to do it because I may be messing with something evil and I don't want to risk having an attachment. So for now I'll go with my gut feeling and leave her in there. Before we move on and look at some everyday people who have found themselves in possession of a haunted doll, I would just like to say that what we will notice is familiar throughout most of these stories is people are asking for assistance as they are unsure what to do with a haunted doll. It is the same for objects. So if you are listening today and you are in possession of a haunted doll or object and you are unsure what to do with it, I'll make one recommendation. The best place to start is a local paranormal investigation group. They are usually happy to help and will love the opportunity to investigate something new. Once they've completed their investigation, they'll be able to give you some assistance as to what you may be able to do with the item. And sometimes, if you want to donate it, they may be able to find someone willing to take it for you. And now, let's have a look at the stories of some everyday people who have found themselves in possession of a haunted doll. A few days ago, I was out with my boyfriend. He saw a cute doll and decided to buy it for me. I was really happy, and as soon as I got home, I put my perfume on her and put her on my bed. Today, I decided to take a nap, and the doll was right behind me. I don't know how to explain what happened next. I was pretty sure I was awake when I felt someone hug me from behind. It's not my boyfriend, we don't live together, and no one was in my room. I tried to move, but I couldn't, and suddenly I heard my boyfriend's voice whispering in my ear. I kept telling myself this is not a dream because it felt so real, but I just could not move at all. I tried screaming, but my voice was muted. I was mortified and tried to move again until I finally broke free and woke up. I have no idea what happened to me. I had sleep paralysis before, but this was different. I don't even know if the doll is related to this. Post update. I started feeling uneasy every time I'm in my room, and I feel watched. I also put the doll in a certain position and found her in another place and another position. I decided to lock her in a box and put her in the garage. Last year I received a doll from my aunt. It was a hand-me-down that she found in storage, so I don't know its origin story or where it came from. Her name is Alice, and the first weird note is that I immediately knew her name. As soon as I held her, I felt her name was Alice. Anyways, originally Alice sat in my room, but one day while cleaning I put her in my closet. After putting her in my closet, weird stuff started happening. I would hear her in the closet, usually knocking against the walls. It was so loud that my friend could hear it over the phone. I would get recurring dreams of someone named the Medicine Girl, and I would wake up from these dreams in sleep paralysis. My other objects and items would go missing randomly, only to be found in places I hadn't left them. My grandma's stuffed bear, that is at least 50 years old, would move across the room and end up in places I hadn't put it. I do practice witchcraft, and the plant on my altar died. All of this stopped when I moved her out of the closet and back into my room. Due to all of this, I believe that she is haunted. However, I can't find anything online about what you're supposed to do with a haunted doll, and I'd like some advice. I believe that she is scared of being alone or doesn't like being hidden. Hence, everything stopped when I removed her from the closet. Any advice would be appreciated. I don't believe in haunted dolls or supernatural things. This is just a fun story from my childhood. All my life I had episodes of sleep paralysis, sleep talking, sleepwalking, and insomnia. Someone, no one remembers who, gave my mum a doll. It was just a simple plastic baby doll, not even one of the creepy ones. It had this wool crocheted pyjamas, hat and socks. We lived with our grandma, so I was used to creepy porcelain dolls and never saw movies like Annabelle anyway, so dolls for me were just toys. Growing up, I was always scared of this doll and never wanted to play with it, so my mum kept it. Around 7 or 8 years old, I started experiencing sleep paralysis, where this doll moved, crawled towards me, and started choking me while laughing evilly. It choked me almost until I passed out, and then crawled back to where it was before. I usually woke up right after, but the awful thing was I never felt when I woke up, so it was like I was already awake and everything was really happening. It felt so real and was so frequent, I started having trouble sleeping. Even if we moved the doll to another room, I experienced it open the door and choke me anyway, then crawl back to the other room and close the door. It went on until my mum just put the doll in a box, close-taped it and hid it in the garage. We still have the doll to this day, almost 20 years later, in the garage, a different house, and I'm still not able to be in the same house or touch it with my bare hands. I never dreamt of it again though. So it's 6 a.m. right now, and I really couldn't sleep after this. I first woke up at midnight, raised my head a bit, looked towards the door to realise that I can hear a really creepy voice of someone singing, which, just by the sound of it, I could definitely tell it was a doll. I was so tired, so I didn't really realise what was happening. The TV was on in the other room, so in my head I thought it might have been coming from there. In my really tired state, I just told myself, if I had to own a doll, I'd shit myself right now, and went back to sleep. Then I woke up at 2 a.m, and I hear the same creepy singing again. The TV was turned off this time, and honestly, the more awake I was getting, the more I was questioning what was actually happening. I realised I was not imagining it, so I've been sat here for 4 hours now thinking about how real this felt. I even googled it in the hope that it had happened to someone else. I'm so creeped out right now, just thinking about that moment. I just know it was there in the other room. I feel like I know what it looks like, even though I never even saw it. Has anyone else experienced this? I'm not really sure where to go to ask, so I'm posting around for some advice. Any is appreciated. We moved into a house around the beginning of December last year. We had never experienced anything more unexplained than a few creaks or squeaks before moving here. The first few weeks were pretty normal, but we would notice my 3-year-old sister, 2 at the time of moving in, would stare and almost watch something. When we would ask, she would tell us she was watching a cat. This continued for a good month or 2, but she never showed any signs of being scared or anything. A couple of months later, there were a handful of occasions she would wake up in the middle of the night screaming and shaking with no explanation. She was terrified, and in too much of a state to explain. She would usually cry herself to sleep. We didn't ask her the following day as not to cause any stress for her, until it got too common to be bad dreams. I gave in and asked her and was met with, "I don't like it when my friend comes at night." This cued the panic button. In recent weeks, we've had some small things happen. A coin being picked up and dropped out of nowhere, headphones rolling over, and the damn touch screen on the washing machine will never stop beeping. But one thing has really stood out. About a month ago, we bought my sister an Eevee toy. She's been a big fan of Pokemon because of our brother and my boyfriend. She fell in love with it. She's never been attached to a toy before, but she would refuse to go anywhere without Eevee. She wouldn't sleep without her, wouldn't even go to the toilet or have dinner without her. That was until 3 days ago. She began to throw Evie across the room and seemed really upset about something. She'd refused to have Evie in the room at bedtime. At first we thought maybe she was just losing interest, as most kids do. But when we asked her why, she said, "I don't want Evie to talk to me like that anymore." I could be crazy, but too much stuff is adding up to me, and I know spirits can target children based on their innocence. But does this seem to be the case to anyone else? Or could it just be her? I don't really know what to think, and any advice or similar experiences would help me feel a little less clueless. When I was younger, between 7 and 10, I lived in a small house in a small town in Missouri. Nothing was abnormal about the house. I mean, normal house settling noises which would cause me to have nightmares frequently. Until this incident I will be diving into, the only weird thing that had happened was our keys going missing. When you walk in the door, there was a giant metal wood stove that we would put our keys on. They went missing for weeks. We destroyed the house looking for them, and one day they just reappeared and nobody knew where they came from. Anyway, there was a doll back when I was younger called an Amazing Grace doll. She had holes in her ears so she could hear you and would turn her head where the noise came from and say, "Mama." Well, I loved this doll. I explicitly remember cleaning my room and propping Grace against the wall so she was sitting up. I laid down on my bed to read when I heard the clicking she would make when her head turned. So I looked up and stared at her and got the normal "Mama" she would say after she heard something. So I tossed my book down and picked her up and made sure she was turned off. She was. So I flipped her switch and then flipped it back to off, thinking this was a normal malfunction. I set her back in her spot and plopped down to continue reading. When I started, she said, "Mama," again. So I went and took all her batteries out. I was over it at this point, so I just tossed her on the ground and got back to my spot. She started clicking quicker and her head was moving back and forth, and she just kept repeating "Mama." I took off, I ran to get my dad, and he saw it and decided we would burn that little doll. We did, and nothing happened again to my recollection, but my nightmares got worse. And this was when I was still religious, so I would put all my stuffed animals around me in a circle to protect me. I had a turquoise dream catcher, and I would pray every night for the nightmares to go away. They didn't until we moved. They weren't every day, but definitely several times a week. When I was about 6, I was laying in bed and watched one of my dolls. It was called a cricket doll, popular in the 80s. Her eyes and mouth moved with music she played from a cassette player on her back. Well, my cricket doll jumped down from the shelf and walked to the side of my bed. I was beyond terrified. I forced my eyes shut as hard as possible and refused to open them until the next day. She was my most favourite doll until that moment. I've had that terrifying memory play in my mind every single day since I was 6. I'm now 37, and it's still as vivid as the day it happened. After that, I had horrible nightmares about being dropped or falling, people being hacked to death with machetes, and me trying to help them only to have them die in my arms, hundreds of them over and over, and I had never been exposed to that kind of violence before. I still to this day will not be near that doll. It ruined playing with all dolls for me after that. My parents have kept cricket all these years because she was expensive in the 80s and they're borderline hoarders. To this day I refuse to go near it. I feel like someone took that doll over and whatever it is, it's negative. They complain constantly of things moving and disappearing and just life, but refuse to get rid of that possessed negative doll. Around the same time, one of my friend's older sisters had a Ouija board. Maybe that's where it started. Since then, I've had quite a few other experiences, but nothing like this. It's hard to share something like this when it sounds so crazy. In 2017, my sister and I went to an antique store and she found a 1978 edition Ronald McDonald doll, the one that has the whistle. He was in near perfect condition except for the tip of his whistle, so she bought him and took him home. We didn't notice anything off about him at first, besides her dog absolutely hating him. She put him in the back room with the rest of her clown doll collection. Ever since he's been in there, any light bulb she puts into the overhead light either pops or goes out within a week. Whenever this doll is in the room with you, he makes you nauseous and like you're going to throw up until you put him back into the room and leave that room and leave him alone. This has rendered her back room useless, and something needs to be done about it. You can't even pass the back room now without feeling sick. Neither of us are knowledgeable enough to know what to do. Can anybody help? We hope you enjoyed today's episode of Out of the Darkness, and as always, the team here at D A Paranormal Service thanks you for listening. If you have a paranormal experience you'd like to share with us, we'd love to hear from you. You can contact us at daparanormalservice@gmail.com or head to our Facebook page. Once again, we'd like to thank all our followers and supporters, and remember to subscribe and follow so that you never miss an episode. And share with your friends if they're into the paranormal, as every time you share, it helps us immensely, and we really appreciate it. This podcast is made possible using Anchor FM, the platform that allows you to build a podcast straight from your phone. Again, we'd like to thank you for listening, and until next time, stay safe.